Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights. Thanks, sponsors, Topps Panini, Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Huggins Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication. This is the final part of my conversation with Mike and Andrew Aronstein. And Rich Klein actually popped in and joined us. So here it is, just some ramblings of some hobby veterans.
I went to the warehouse for my local card store, but it's a little more than my local card store. They have 16 locations. You technically had two stores. The two baseball nostalgia stores were very closely intertwined. The one in Albany and the one in Upper Saddle River, which I actually went to quite a few times. How did you deal with having those stores and doing stuff for them?
I would supply this store in Cooperstown with things that I made, but mostly TCMA stuff.
Right.
It wasn't Topps. So it was easy.
But Pete was operating the store in Cooperstown. You were not there.
Exactly right, Andrew.
Pete, and then Bill Himmelman was in the store in Upper Saddle River.
Bill's fascinating because Bill was also one of the leading basketball researchers in the country.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
The official historian for the NBA. And last week, I found an article. I do a lot of research on newspapers.com talking about the opening of the store. And there's a photo of Bill in the store.
I was closer to Danny, who was his assistant, than I was to Bill. Danny and I were pretty good friends. So you were just supplying the stores. Were you also supplying the Upper Saddle River store, or were they just getting it down from Albany?
I don't think you were as involved. Like, you were a part owner, but as Cooperstown, you would go up all the time.
Yeah, at least once a year.
Who wouldn't want to go up to Cooperstown a couple of times a year?
We would supply the induction day cards. So I was very involved in Cooperstown. The Hall of Fame was a customer, and the post office. So,
hey, you got two good customers there.
Oh boy, they would pay their bills on time. Terrific. The first induction day comes, I think, was in '84.
We cataloged as many of those as we could. I don't think we got them all, but I know we cataloged them. Because I was very anal, especially after Jim stepped back a little from cataloging. I was really trying to get as much TCMA stuff in as I could. It was like a life's passion of mine because, and I don't mean this in a bad way, you were doing so many things you never kept track. So I figured I'd keep track for you. And now at ComC, I'm doing the same thing again. And some of the work was done by other people too. So I don't want to say it's just me, but we have some really interesting things of TCMA items that have been sent into ComC. The most interesting stuff, which has driven us crazy, there's a whole bunch of 1979 Stars of the 50s printing errors.
I'm well known for mistakes.
Yeah, even as a kid, I would say, why is this card like this? Why is this error? Why is that error? And there's all kinds of numbering issues. There are numbers missing that there's just no card. The numbers just don't exist. And the backs are upside down or they're a different color. And I think, Dad, that's because you just were printing using whatever paper was around.
The mill printing was doing all the printing. At the beginning, I was doing all the artwork too. We didn't have an artist.
And the typesetting? And
I was putting everything together on a light table with like glue. I was gluing everything together.
Yeah, I started out that way too. And that's tricky. And even if it's okay when there, something could get lost on the way to the proofs or the sheets.
Our artist, his name was Stan Arnold. And he called, and we were issuing a magazine. We had Baseball Magazine. And he called me one night. He said he found a paragraph stuck on his pants. And I said, it's too late.
I found them on the floor. I found them on the floor. They were waxed. They weren't glued. They were waxed.
You're exactly, now that I'm thinking about it, it was wax. Exactly. Or the paragraphs wouldn't be in the right order. They'd get cut up and pasted and then
the earliest Beckett baseball card monthlies were done that way. And some of the annual books were traditional paste up. But the good thing is most of them were checklists where you could follow, the numbers needed to be in sequence, but that seems like dark ages now.
But we did the insert for the Yankee yearbook just when computer printing was starting. And someone said, you can set that type on a computer. Really? we saved like $15,000 on setting type. It's amazing how things have changed.
It'd be prohibitive, some of those things. That's why when Krause was doing SCD, they were doing it traditional typesetting with all those microscopic ads. They had a huge proofreading department, and that's why we couldn't compete with them on that. We had to go digital eventually, which made sense.
One of my life's work is trying to figure out everything TCMA ever did. One thing I've noticed is some of the cards, there's two different types. They have no MLB logo, and later they were reissued with an MLB logo where you paid for licensing. How did you end up choosing what you chose to put the cards on for the licensing? Because it seems haphazard. A card here and a card there.
The license we got was only for things larger than 2.5, 3.5. So when we did the uncut sheets of like 18 cards, that was licensed. But when we did the 2.5, 3.5, that was not licensed.
But you're talking about the magazines, the cards.
I believe the 81 Sandy Koufax minor league card exists with or without.
I think what Rich is talking about are CMC cards that were done for the collecting kits. Somehow they had a license. So when they issued those cards, why they're putting MLB licensing on a Albuquerque Dukes Sandy Koufax card, I don't know.
There are some fascinating cards that have MLB license. You can check what the COMC database is. It's like one card per set in a lot of these sets. It's really weird. There's like the 81 Stars of the 60s has 5 people with MLB license on the back. It almost seems random and haphazard.
I was gone by then. I was not involved in that. That was Collectors Marketing Corp, CMC. Yeah, I was out.
It sounds to me like they obtained a license somehow, and whatever cards they were issuing at that time, they were just putting the logo on all of them because
those were sold in military bases. Their biggest customer was the military. All over the world.
Back in 1981, all the Donruss errors, hasn't that ship sailed now? Rich, to his credit, is really trying to make an accurate catalog. I certainly tried to do that, but it's such a small percentage of the people that care now about obscure variations, let's say, with or without the copyright or with or without the MLB. And yet I'm a purist. I believe the story needs to be told.
Jim, it's funny you say that because I got an email from my manager's manager yesterday about there's 92 Donruss Nolan Ryan with or without a period after the INC. And they're getting so many requests. They specifically asked we not just keep it in the continuation line or the variation line, that we make it more obvious for anybody looking at the card that the card has or doesn't have the period after the INC. Pretty amazing. There's actually a growing world of people looking for those obscure, overproduced or junk wax era variations.
And how the Donruss set was born in 1981. I got a call from Bill Madden who said, Donruss just got a baseball card license. Here's the name of the president of the company. Give him a call. Tell him I could get him all the photography, right, and Bill Lyman would do all the writing. So I called Stuart Lyman was his name. And I said, I can put the entire set together for you. They were in North Carolina, I think. He said, we'll fly up tomorrow and we'll come to your office and we'll discuss it. I tell him I know every photographer. They have every picture of every major leaguer.
Anybody you didn't know, Bill Madden knew. Bill Madden, super connected, very entrepreneurial. I had some dealings with him. That was great. And yet the production value of the set, the cardstock was poor. The collation was horrible. I don't think that was your fault.
No. Anyway, they came up and I gave them all the information and they said, what do you want? And I said, I want to be the exclusive distributor to the hobby.
Okay.
So they said, okay. We shook hands. I went home and my wife said, how did it go? I said, I'm the exclusive distributor to the hobby. She said, do you have that in writing? I said, no, we shook hands. She said, oh my God, you need a contract. I called Stuart Lyman. He said, type out a contract, text it to me, and I'll sign it and text it back to you. That was it. So I do a mailing to all my customers, telling them I'm the exclusive distributor And you have to order by April 1st. I think on March 15th. Oh, I ordered 10,000 sets.
Did you get them as sheets? They were uncut, weren't they?
Yes, we cut them up. But with 15 days to go, I had $5,000. On like the last week, $500,000 came in. I called, do it back on press. And that's when all the corrections were made.
You had no input into that, right?
No. But people were telling them about all the errors. So they corrected them.
I thought it was like a living set concept. Mike Vail with or without the trade line.
At the end of the baseball season, they called me down to Charlotte, I think. And since they were Southerners, they stabbed me in the front rather than in the back. They told me I couldn't be the exclusive distributor anymore. So I said, okay, just don't tell anybody. They said, great. We won't tell anybody. 82, I did better than I did in 81.
Were they intending for you to be their fall guy? Or what was the deal? Or
No,
is it a different deal?
I just did the hobby. I don't think they thought the hobby would be that huge. Yeah. But I was very close to a printer in Peekskill, New York, and he was cutting the sets up.
Plus, you had a great mailing list, actual mail. You had one of the best lists in the hobby.
I had 105,000 names, which I accumulated all on my own. I advertised in the sporting news, and I said, send $1 and we'll send you 10 cards. So those are all the names that I collected. And we would get a 20% response, which was amazing for mail order. You get 5% supposed to be good, but we were getting 20. That lasted 8 years, 9 years.
Do you feel like you're a little bit of a Forrest Gump guy?
Yeah.
Because you've just been in the right place, the right time, and done some really cool stuff.
Then the cliff comes, and you go, off the cliff. I keep telling you, the wall is there. You're going to hit the wall. Or I also tell him, genius, idiot.
I don't know about that.
Andrew, you have a fascinating history too now. You're one of the right-hand people for Al Crisfulli, who's a quality person on Quality Auction. You're dealing with some pretty high-level stuff. How did what you saw growing up with what your dad did get you ready to do what you're doing today?
I think just being around the hobby, behind the scenes of the hobby, and certainly seeing how my dad would deal with customers, I think that was a big influence on me. And seeing how much respect people had for my dad at that time and today, of course. So certainly that gives me something to aspire to. But I think, just being around the hobby and understanding the collecting mentality, I think it would be tough for somebody to come into certainly the auction business and selling vintage cards if, number one, they weren't interested in it themselves, and number two, just didn't have an understanding of what collectors want and how we operate.
Do they expect big things from you based on your last name? Are you held to a standard, do you think? Because of your excellence?
You will see a lot of people in the hobby, and you've been involved with it for so long.
Sure. I know a lot of people in the hobby, and it's just a lot of fun. I've always been proud to be involved in the hobby. And now, certainly, I'm involved in a much different way than I have been in the past because our company is growing so much. And really, my expertise is vintage photography because I grew up with sports photography and sports licensing. So being able to put that expertise to use has been really fun for me. And I'd like to think people respect my opinion when it comes to vintage photos.
Yeah, I think Andrew's expertise is amazing.
I admire anybody who can do photography. One of my best friends from my dealing days in New Jersey, his son is also one of the leading experts on photography. Paul Reeferson, his dad, Steve, and I were very good friends.
Paul and I know each other very well.
Steve brought bagels to every show, and he'd always have the best food. I could always eat breakfast at his table at the National. He was fine with it. He insisted I'd have breakfast, and we would chat about stuff going on. No, Steve and I were very close for many years. I'm sorry you never got to meet Paul's dad. You missed a really good dealer and a really better person.
Yeah, that's what I hear. No, I have a lot of respect for Paul. He and I are actually co-admins of a vintage photography Facebook group that we run.
Cool.
Yeah, we really enjoy that. So he and I talk all the time.
Good.
Yeah, it's good to know that you're friendly with him.
His dad got upset once when somebody thought I did something which I didn't do, and the dad basically, because he's tough. He negotiates hard. He don't steal nothing. But then Steve heard that and said, if you ever say anything like that, I'll take you to the back alley and you won't be coming out.
I'll tell you what really lit the flame under me in terms of vintage photography. Two things, really. The sets that my dad produced with the 50s and the 60s sets, those were all created from original news service photo negatives that TCMA and that Photophile had in their files. So I was always around that stuff. But father had thousands and thousands of original, what now would be considered type 1 photos from the 1910s and the 1920s. And that's what Don Honig used to create all those books that he did in the late 80s and the early 90s. If you flip through those books, the photography is just out of this world. And it's all dead ball era images and 1920s images that are just phenomenal. And all the originals were still in the files at Photophile.
Hey, Mike,
Wow.
did you get that stuff from Bert Sugar?
Yes. I walked into his office one day and he said, I got to get rid of these cabinets. I said, what do you want? He said, $500. I said, okay, you got a deal. And
How many photos were there?
I think
thousands.
when I was working with them at Photophile, there was between 6,000 and 7,000. But I think when my father bought those file cabinets from Bert, they were closer to 10,000.
Wow. That's like the deal of the century.
The photos in there are just incredible. Because part of the research I did working with those photos was I figured out that they originated with the Police Gazette. Somehow, all of those photos, are a lot of them anyway, because Dad, you did accumulate some over the years, but the oldest ones came from the Police Gazette, and they were acquired by a
Ring magazine.
Bert Sugar.
Bert was interesting. This was like a side venture for him because boxing was his real love.
He was making all those books. I think he wrote at least 10 books, at least 10, maybe 20.
But he was a collector too.
Oh, yeah. He was really a brilliant guy. He was
Teller.
He was nuts, but he was brilliant.
I went to Yorktown High School, and we played against Horace Greeley High School, which was a few towns over. And Bert's house was right next to the baseball field. He came to my game. I remember that very well. And I ran into him in Cooperstown. It must have been right before he passed away. And I'm glad I did this. I stopped him on the street, and he probably hadn't seen me in a decade. But I said hello, and that was the last time I saw him.
Smoking and drinking in excess is not good.
There's a bunch of people. If I was walking down the street in Cooperstown and they walked by me, I wouldn't know who it was. Bert Sugar, you would know exactly that's Bert Sugar because of
The hat on and the
hat.
cigar.
Yes, cigar. Yeah, no, he'd be a one of one.
The man